Okay, we'll call to order this meeting of the Assembly Higher Education Committee. Today we have 4 bills on our agenda. One bill is a vote-only bill. The other 3 will be fully heard today. Looks like we have a quorum. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Block.
Here.
Donnelly. Here. Asajian. Here. Brownlee. Fong. Galgiani. Lara. Here. Miller. Portantino.
I'm here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum. We will move to our first bill. Let me just say, as a general comment, on all of these bills, each the proponents and opponents will each have up to 4 minutes for witness statements. You can have as many witnesses as you want in those 4 minutes. And then, of course, we'll hear from any additional support or oppose organizations or individuals merely stating their support or opposition to a bill. But 4 minutes for arguments by witnesses. The member himself or herself, of course, has as much time as they need, subject to chair's intervention. With that, we'll call the first bill, which is AB 1237. It's item 3 on our agenda by Assemblyman Nastandi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. In January 1996, CSU Board of Trustees introduced a plan to reduce the need for remedial education in English and math to not more than 10% of regularly admitted new freshmen by 2007. Although there has been minor progress, the initiative as a whole was not a success. Of students deemed eligible for CSU in the fall of 2009, 38% of freshmen were not ready for college, for credit-bearing college-level math, and 49% of freshmen were not ready for credit-bearing college English. In fact, remediation rates from some campuses have not gone down, but actually increased. What this bill does, the approach taken by AB 1237 would not directly affect the eligibility of the student, but simply require that if the state were to choose to subsidize remedial coursework, the resources would be provided through Proposition 98 funding, which is the account from which K-12 schools and community colleges derive their state support. And because failure to be ready to be prepared for credit-bearing college coursework is a failure of the K-12 education system, the bill allows the funding for the remedial coursework to come from the K-12 portion of the Prop 98 general fund. The point of the bill is to say there's a problem still in remedial education, and the money's coming out of the CSU system. What my bill intends to do, what I intend to do is say, it's really a matter of a discussion point, saying, why is this happening? Why are kids going through the system? Why are they graduating from high school? Why are they passing their A through G courses, get into CSU, and we still have this high rate of not being prepared? Who's responsible? How are we going to fix the plan? And as I mentioned earlier, there was a plan in 1996 to drop it down to 10%. It has not done so. So I'm asking to say, look, let's go back to who was responsible for this from the beginning. That would have been to the K-12 education system. Let's have them pay for it. Why are we paying twice for the same job? So with that, I would like to introduce Bill Lucia from EdVoice on behalf of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are supporting the bill, and I think the author said exactly what the issue is. It's not an issue of funding from the standpoint of the CSU and not wanting to have these classes offered and available in terms of location. So, but it is fundamentally a question of whether the CSU budget in the non-Prop 98 general fund should be paying for high school classes. So as your committee consultant pointed out in the analysis, that it fundamentally comes down to that question about the need for remediation. EdVoice's position is not to say that these students should not be provisionally admitted or that there shouldn't be a workout plan with options that are available even through their EAP program opportunities or the summer ahead of time that's in advance of the credit-bearing coursework that they take. And we're not also wanting to be clear here, we're not recommending that these classes not be available on the campus or through online provision that's controlled through the CSU system and connected to the counseling that would take place in terms of what specific remediation would be needed and coordinate that education plan for the individual pupil appropriately. And we already know in some cases community colleges do have agreements with the University of California and CSU where community college faculty are in the bricks and mortar of the CSU campus or the UC campus in an evening class or whatever and providing that. And so the apportionment is coming through and counting as a community college FTE as opposed to something happening out of the non-98 side of the general fund budget, and particularly given with the trigger cuts that just came down this year, even with a positive action by the voters in the November election, if that were to happen given the governor's budget, there's no COLA being proposed for higher ed for the near future. There's a limited amount of resources. Clearly, the issue of remediation and providing resources, the state providing resources for high school classes is worth having a policy conversation about, and whether the state of California should continue to do that out of non-98 general fund in those segments of higher ed, or should it be more appropriately funded out of the Proposition 98 side of the general fund account. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses, Mr. Standy? In support. Any witnesses in opposition? Okay. Seeing no witnesses in support or opposition, and other than Mr. Lucia, do we have any comments or questions from members of the committee? Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Assembly Members Standy, for bringing this forward. It's obviously an important concern. It seems as if we have students who are falling between the cracks of higher ed and K through 12. But forgive my ignorance, but I want you to walk me through just a little bit of why is it that we're admitting students who aren't ready for college when we seem to have an abundance who are. I'm not familiar with all this to start with. What is the thinking? How widespread is this problem?
How widespread? I gave some statistics earlier. 38% are not ready for math. 49% are not ready for English. CSU, it's a policy they would, I believe, would be up to CSU's policy to decide whether or not.
It's part of the master plan. There's a certain proportion of graduating high school seniors that are to be eligible, and they complete the A through G requirements. So if they meet the unit-based requirements in the A through G coursework satisfactorily, that's generally determined through high school graduation, then GPA, and other admission provisions that are considered both at the system-wide level and the campus level. They're admitted in some cases provisionally. So they may in fact be ready to go and write in the blue book on their writing. They're doing great with English language arts, and they're ready to go and take humanities classes and other things. But for example, in the sciences or in math, they may not quite be ready to do credit-bearing coursework, college level math. And so the system would say that it's important to get up to speed to be prepared to do that, to do college level work in mathematics and the sciences and other analytical work. And so they're provisionally admitted, and then there's a plan to say that you're not quite where you need to be and you need to improve. And up until now, with more resources than have currently been available, the general fund has supported that activity as they have with all the other work. And we're kind of at a point now where some of these tough questions need to be asked. And from being student focused, it's not about taking anything away from the student, but it's trying to help open up the conversation and say which account is appropriate in terms of providing that state of California support for that student.
Mr. Donnelly, I think your point is well made, that how are these kids passing? How are they passing the A through G classes, achieving success as far as it's been defined K through 12, yet arrive at CSU and not prepared? That's kind of fundamental.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. And also this notion that here we are facing these massive cuts to both K through 12 and higher ed, and more cuts coming. I don't know. I paid my way through school, and one of the things I discovered is I remember when I got an F The very first time I got an F. I was getting an F coming up on a midterm in French. And it was the hardest thing to try to catch up, but I did everything I could, and I threw myself into that. But I was paying for my education. I had a little bit of help, but I was paying for it by working. And I think we kind of need to throw this back to the kids and say, look, if you're serious, then go out and earn the spot, and we'll help you, instead of this automatic assumption that the responsibility falls on either K through 12 or higher ed. I want to question that assumption altogether.
Except if they're passing the courses, they're assuming, I think, that, okay, I can go to college now because I've just passed those courses and may not only pass, received A's or B's, and they get there and lo and behold, they can't pass the test. Like that's the ability to comment on
It's
that.
disturbing as well.
Mr. Stanley, you wouldn't want to say something if that's okay with you?
Sir.
Just in terms of even in the instance where if you're not otherwise eligible for financial aid and you're paying tuition, just to point out from a fiscal standpoint in the state of California, there's still a subsidy. There's a net subsidy even when if you're not eligible for a Cal grant or getting campus-based aid, there's still general fund going to the CSU system even when people are paying semester tuition. There's general fund support for that. And so the point that we're simply making is that it's tough times. This is a process that has been attempted officially through the state of California, coming from the top down, from the higher education segments down, and we're trying to help show from the standpoint of where the issue arises is in the K-12 system going up. And right now, there's no incentive whatsoever in the K-12 system with respect to this issue of the degree to which the general fund subsidizes high school work in higher ed to have a connectivity to that. So we would argue that this kind of an action in prioritizing resources this way, as well as the work to look at aligning California state standards to being really truly college ready and having good indicators on assessments and other measures of whether students are college ready, would be good steps forward in making sure that we shine the light on what's going on and recognizing that it's a taxpayer dollar regardless. Right, and we're just saying from which account it should more appropriately, from a public policy standpoint, come from. And the question is, should college non-credit bearing coursework in college high school classes be paid for out of the Prop 98 budget or not, or should it be the non-98?
Okay. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee?
Move the bill.
Bill's been moved. Is there a second? Moved and seconded. I'm a little puzzled in terms of what actually will change if this bill makes it through the entire system and is signed by the governor ultimately. I mean, this isn't a budget bill or a budget committee. I mean, we're just basically saying what we hope will happen by passing this bill. Is that, Mr. Standy?
I think it is an intent for the budget process committee to examine the issue and to do just that. It's not a binding fiscal bill.
So what you actually would be doing then is taking dollars that now come out of CSU or UC budgets and moving those expenditures over to Prop 98?
No, in fact, what it would do is in those budgets it would free up flexibility. Where right now there are resources that are appropriated by the state of California to support those programs. Those dollars would be freed up for other activities in CSU and UC. Then the measure explicitly authorizes the legislature to support, nevertheless, those remediation activities with Prop 98 dollars. And so it creates it basically still creates that opportunity. It would be something that the budget would acknowledge and say these are remediation costs.
And so where would the Prop 98 dollars come? Are these new Prop 98 dollars?
It would come out of the overall Prop 98 appropriation. So when the general fund appropriated money for remediation in this UC or CSU system, it would be counted
so
towards
who
the Prop
loses?
98 guarantee.
Who loses? Would it be K-12 that loses?
It depends on how the future action of the legislature. The way the bill is technically written on page 3 of the bill, it authorizes the legislature to make the decision about whether they want it to come out of the whole Prop 98 K-14 pie or it explicitly authorizes it, if it chooses, to take it just out of the K-12 pie.
Now, why do we need a bill to authorize us to do that? We can do that now.
There's been litigation back in the mid-'90s in CTA v. Gould, and the definitions of what is inside and outside of Prop 98 in a statutory measure that codified the settlement agreement said that the legislature needed to pass a standalone measure outside of the regular budget process to have this kind of a policy discussion to decide what could be authorized as in or outside of Prop 98. And that's why you see either a standalone measure here. The governor's initiative for proposal for the November ballot is another example of it. It's a standalone measure, and it would define 1.06% of the sales tax as no longer being counted as SAL revenues for purposes of Prop 98. And that would be consistent with the CTA v. Gould settlement, is to have a separate standalone conversation about whether it's in or out, as opposed to just willy-nilly decide to do it through the Budget Act itself.
Ms. Brownlee?
Yeah, just to follow up on that line of questioning. So what the bill would do would give higher ed more flexibility with their funds because they wouldn't be doing the remedial piece of it anymore, correct?
That's right.
But it's not shifting any more money back to the general fund. They get to hold on to that money. So I guess the question is for so your assumption here is if this bill were to become law, it will incentivize or provide a lever to better prepare students in the K-12 system for university?
Yes, by helping focus the attention on where the appropriation is, and recognize that as the CSU is just this fall kicking off a process, for example, of looking at where each individual kid is and whether they take the EAP or other placement exams, look at the specific options, and then make sure that recognizes from the legislature's lens, from the legislature's standpoint, recognizing that there are efficiencies and appropriate mechanisms to provide for the remediation, and to have a say-so through the policy and the budgeting process. The legislature can determine that it would recommend, in fact, like the CSU, as is putting out in the committee's analysis, may say that some of the classes be taken in 12th grade as part of the high school preparation because they've taken the EAP. So in certain cases, it's absolutely appropriate that the remediation be a K-12 dollar because it's happening in a unified school district. In another case, it may be more appropriate to consider somebody who may be provisionally accepted to the CSU system because they passed one part of the AP, the math, and maybe not the English language arts, that they in fact be provisionally admitted. They're on the CSU campus in that fall, and there's a conscious effort to say, okay, there's a relationship with a community college or a Prop 98 dollar that funds the remediation cost of that extra semester of work to get that student up to speed on English language arts.
Well, I guess, the question for me is that I think if you ask the question, do we need more remediation for students, I think the answer probably is yes. I mean, I think that there's a whole other discussion about what a grade means, what passing an AP class means. I mean, we have the AP tests and so forth, and that is a more objective analysis of what a student has learned in those particular classes. But sometimes kids don't take the test, and so there's a whole number of things about what does a grade mean, what are kids really learning. I mean, that's a whole big conversation that I think we should be having. I think that there's a lot of merit into that, but it just seems to me that we're giving the university system more flexibility, saying students need to be better prepared before they come, but then there's not a bucket of sort of increased revenue to help support what is needed to better prepare kids to the university system.
I think I would challenge the premise, though, that they need more money to do that. I think the question would be, are they effectively teaching those courses? If they're taking the appropriate courses, A through G, shouldn't they be prepared then when they enter the school? It would be anecdotal if it weren't so many kids that it's happening to. So something's going on here. Are they inflating the grades, or are they not connecting the coursework properly, or what is?
I don't understand how this is going to leverage that kind of policy issue relative to grade inflation. What does that mean from school to school, from district to district?
As a system, what it does is for both in the policy committee, but particularly in the budget process through the budget subcommittee, to have a specific conversation. So you have a budget committee conversation, and you're looking at the line items, just like you would whether you're looking at the entire higher ed segment's budget, UC or CSU, or any given individual line item in the Budget Act. You'd be coming to the question of remediation and focused from a standpoint of policy, fiscal, and the effectiveness issue of that, and deciding how to appropriate resources. And so it would be up to any given year's set of appropriations through the Budget Act for the legislature to make the fiscal policy decision about how much and out of which accounts for that to come. So how much would be funded out of the general fund, how much would be funded out of the Prop 98 pie, and within the Prop 98 pie, how much would be a K-12 and how much would be a community college expense, and it's up to the legislature to appropriate more money for that if they to have the oversight about the specific programs, about is a specific program efficacious or not in terms of helping kids move through and be truly ready for credit-bearing college coursework.
And do we know how much money the UC and the CSU spend on remediation out of the money that we allocate?
That's a hard question. In fact, it's been a moving target for over 15 years now since the compact started by Governor Wilson. There's been little legislative scrutiny and oversight over the larger picture of how much money goes for any particular line item. Back in the day, the rough ballpark estimates have been in the ballpark of anywhere from $9 to $15 million.
For both?
For both, yeah, per year.
Mr. Portantino.
Yeah, I'm going to find it difficult to support the bill as proposed today for some of the issues that have been raised, but there have been some very good points that have raised, and you just talked about the lack of legislative oversight of the institutions and the fact that we don't do line item budgeting. Shame on us for not doing that, because we could direct our priorities by doing that, and that's something we should do. So the spirit of what you're trying to do, the overall concept of remediation, you ask 5 people who's responsible for it and you get 5 different answers. Again, we as a state don't have a thorough fundamental focus on how are we going to help those students who need our help and who's responsible for it. And we certainly don't fund it appropriately and attack the problem, so that's why we don't solve it. So all of the issues you're raising are completely and totally legitimate. I just don't know if, again, as Ms. Brownlee talked about, the budgetary situation we have right now allow us to do what you're proposing. So I applaud the efforts and the goal, but I can't support the implementation as proposed, but certainly think we should line item budget at the very least.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Donnelly.
I would also just like to say I applaud what you're trying to do, and now that you guys have kind of fleshed it out, I think it's something I can support because it puts incentive back into the system. And bottom line is it holds K through 12 accountable for the product they're producing. They're sending kids saying they're ready. They're not ready. They should have to pay, and eventually it'll give them an incentive to produce a better product. So I appreciate what you're trying to do.
Ms.
Well,
Brownlee.
this bill will be double referred to my committee, so I'm not going to weigh in today. If it makes it to my committee, I'll weigh in then. I also agree that this issue of, or not agree, but I believe that the issue that I'm talking about in terms of looking, having conversations about, what does it mean? What are kids really learning in school? What does a grade really mean? I think we need to have a lot more conversation around, and is an area that we, I think, need to explore more deeply. I just, I do have the concerns of, as Mr. Portantino said, relative to the financial difficulty that we're in right now, whether I applaud the intention and where you're going, but do we really have the wherewithal at this particular point in time to rethink this, restructure this, and do it effectively, given the fact that we're depleting our resources as opposed to increasing our resources. So that is my final comment.
Okay, seeing no other comments or questions, let me just say I'm disappointed that we have not had any speaker in opposition, even though at least one, I think the CSU, has let us know they are in opposition. We would like, yes.
Chair, it's my understanding that our staff director met with the author, and we've pulled back our letter of opposition.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Important for the other committee members to know then. Thank you, Wes. Appreciate that. And so, okay, so hearing no opposition, the chair will not make a recommendation on this. We have a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Asajian, second by Mr. Donnelly. The motion before us is due pass to the Education Committee. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Block.
I'll pass.
Donnelly. Aye. Donnelly, aye. Asajian. Asajian, aye. Brownlee. Fong. Galgiani. Lara. Lara, no. Miller. Miller, aye. Portantino. No vote. Okay, so 3 yes, 1 no.
Okay, 3 yes, 1 no as of now. Do we have members who aren't here yet? Okay, so the bill fails. Okay, the bill fails, Mr. Snoddy. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, his own. Okay, our next bill is by Mr. Davis, and Mr. Davis is not able to be here today, so presenting on his behalf is Mr. Portantino. It is item number 1 on our agenda, AB 645. Mr. Portantino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm presenting on behalf of Mr. Davis, as the chair mentioned, who could not be here today. AB 645 would require that undergraduate students in the CSU system successfully complete 2 ethnic studies courses prior to graduation. Currently, these classes are not required but are elective. This bill is necessary, according to the author, because it will serve to develop a more well-rounded students on our public campuses across the state, making them better aware of racial and ethnic dynamics that exist within our society. Furthermore, in a state like California, where minorities are in the majority, the cultural awareness that is gained from ethnic studies courses is critical to students' competitiveness in our state economy. And I'm pleased to have with me 2 CSU faculty members, Dr. Kenneth Monteiro, Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University, and Dr. Timothy Fong, Professor and Chair of Ethnic Studies Departments at the Sacramento State University.
Thank you. Your witnesses, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman and Committee. I'm pleased and I'm actually invigorated to be here because 40 years ago, the issue was whether ethnic studies would even be born, and it was literally a fight. Today, we're just talking about when we'll teach it, how we'll teach it, and whether we'll require it, and we're having it in a discussion that's been invited by the legislation. This is progress, so I want to be really clear as to where we are. This is a wonderful thing a half century later. So the question today is whether teaching of ethnic studies should be required. In order to address that, I need to address what is ethnic studies, because I think there's a lot of things being thrown around. I'm the dean of a college of ethnic studies. That college has a set of 5 departments. We have 6,000 students doing 120 to 150 sections of literature, social sciences, the health sciences. It's a range of things. So I'm not sure that some of the things I've heard are necessarily ethnic studies. Ethnic studies is the academic studies of the intellectual traditions, institutions, cultures, struggles, triumphs, accomplishments, and contributions of people of color in America, their diaspora, and their homelands. In order to better understand that, what is it being countered to? Oh, and these studies are done with the primacy of the given voices of the indigenous people and relevancy to their lives. But what's it being contrasted to? It's being contrasted to what some would call white studies. I'd prefer to call it European American studies. And what is European American studies? It's studies of the intellectual traditions, institutions, cultures, struggles, triumphs, and contributions of Americans of European descent. And these studies are done with the primacy of their interests and relevancy to their lives. K through 12, university, that is required. I would not argue against requiring it, because to understand America as it is constituted in California as it's constituted, you must understand the European ancestry and how it developed this country. The question is, why would you not require understanding the contributions of everyone else? Except for historical reasons. Okay. And it's in that context that I support AB 645 in requiring ethnic studies. Now, the good news, again, is that at the CSUs and UCs, you can have a full education. You can choose one. You can. What we're saying at this point in history, maybe it's time to also require it. So, is in closing in terms of that, and I really want to not put this as polar opposites as a battle in that way. It's not that kind of period, I don't think. But there is this notion that we're at a point in time where, with California, its youth is already.
You've used about 3 minutes of the total.
I'm sorry. Let me stop. And so basically the point is that I believe that to be an educated person, you need to be aware of the society that you're in. And we, people of color in America, are not some foreign, other, and exotic. We're part of the fabric.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee. Ethnic Studies has provided important value-added academic content and skills to all students who major or minor in ethnic studies, or simply take 1 or 2 courses in ethnic studies regardless of his or her major or career aspirations. The most recent assessment report of general education on the general education race and ethnicity requirement found 80% of students strongly agree or agreed that the course provided them with better understanding of cultures of ethnic and racial groups in the U.S., the diversity of cultures within social groups, and the histories of underrepresented groups in the United States. Student evaluations of ethnic studies courses in spring 2011 found 87% of students rated our courses very good to excellent in the areas of course material and organization, course structure and methods, and the instructor. Lastly, AB 645 is an important statement on what is valued in a quality liberal arts education and what is expected of a truly educated Californian. At Sacramento State, there is already 9 units required of basic communication, 12 units of units required in physical sciences, 12 units required in arts and humanities, 15 units required in social sciences, including American institutions. And in closing, the Department of Ethnic Studies is committed to work collaboratively with other departments and the Academic Senate on our campus to fully and faithfully implement AB 645. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support? Please come forward. Just come forward and state your name and what organization you represent, if any.
Okay. Professor Boatamo Musupje. I am a professor of ethnic studies at California State University, Sacramento, and director of Pan-African Studies, which is within Ethnic Studies Department.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses in support? Any witnesses in opposition? Witnesses in opposition will get about 5 minutes total, as that's about how long the witnesses in support took.
Chair and members, Nadia Leal Carrillo with the University of California. The university must regrettably oppose AB 645. While we appreciate and indeed share the author's interest in promoting awareness of ethnic and cultural diversity among our students, we believe the bill constitutes an unwarranted intrusion into the UC Regents' constitutionally granted authority for decision-making over curriculum and instruction. Furthermore, as the bill analysis points out, several UC campuses already require coursework in ethnic studies or similar fields as part of their undergraduate general education requirements. As such, we believe we already comply with the spirit of AB 645, and we simply strongly prefer to leave the academic policy and degree requirements to university faculty. I also wanted to elaborate a little more in regards to the author's interest to foster a more tolerant college campus environment. And despite our position on the bill, I want to be clear that UC is committed to creating an inclusive and welcoming environment for all students, faculty, and staff. To that end, UC has already undertaken many initiatives in this area. For example, we have an annual accountability sub-report on diversity in response to the increased number of incidents that are cited in the analysis. In the spring of 2010, UC President Udall formed the Advisory Council on Campus Climate, Culture, and Inclusion, and which is also, in addition, each chancellor at each of our 10 campuses has created a similar council, and the Regents created an ad hoc committee on campus climate. We've also launched an online reporting system allowing community members to report incidents of bias or intolerance, which is monitored closely. And finally, I just want to say that a thorough review of all UC policies regarding issues of tolerance and diversity is ongoing. Our goal is to ensure those policies are as effective as possible while still preserving personal and academic freedom. So we are happy to provide additional information in any of these initiatives and work with the author, staff, committee staff, and any of the members moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Happy New Year, folks. Wes Larson, California State University. We've met several times with the author and his staff, and the chancellor's personally had a conversation with Mr. Davis. I want to make it clear to the committee that the support of our faculty that are in your analysis reflect their personal views and don't reflect the university or their campus or their department. That's their personal view. Everybody has a right to express their point of view, but the university, the Board of Trustees is given the responsibility to taking positions to the Chancellor, and the Chancellor has an opposed position on this. From time to time, faculty is invited to take enter in on issues that's really germane to their work, and that's why the Academic Senate is opposed. While we appreciate the author's intent to increase awareness in the value of the importance of diversity, we find it troubling that this will usurp the faculty's role in preparing curriculum.
And to that end, I see we have a Faculty Senate representative.
Correct.
You have 1 minute left in your presentation if you want to cede that to him.
With that, well, I'll turn it over to Dr. Krabacher and the Academic Senate.
Okay.
Tom?
You have about 1 minute.
Thank you. I'll be brief. My name is Tom Krabacher. I'm from the Academic Senate of the California State University. I'm also a faculty member at Sac State. A lot of the points that are of concern to the Senate have already been raised, so let me just raise one other point, and that is implementation of this is going to fall to the Academic Senate, both system-wide and to the campuses, and there are a lot of uncertainties there that pose real problems, potential problems. For example, many majors, many disciplines do not have, at least at the CSU, the flexibility to take these courses as electives. So they would be an additional, in a semester campus, 6-unit requirement. And those 6 units would represent 10%, for example, 10%, for example, of the 60 units that the CSU has for any transfer degree or transfer student under SB 1440. And there's real concern as to where, where those units would come from. They would either have to be additional, they would have to come out of existing requirements. And our concern is that there would be heavy costs and time to reconfigure transfer and articulation agreements, especially the work done on SB 1440. And it would fly in the face of efforts to streamline the progress to degree, which in recent years we've done by trying to reduce the unit requirements. I'll end at that point.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses in opposition? Just state your name and organization you represent. Seeing none, I'll now ask my committee colleagues if they have any questions or comments. Mr. Donnelly, then Mr. Asajian.
I appreciate your laying out what ethnic studies is supposed to be. I thought that was very well done. It certainly sounds innocuous and maybe even important on many levels. I think it is important for us to understand each other. I know that many people share my view that many of these courses go way beyond just putting a different point of view up there, and some of them that I'm aware of have gone to the point of potentially even being subversive, where hatred of this country is being taught, where the foundations of this country are undermined by some of the teaching, and but that's not my objection today. My objection is that, and it's interesting because the university system is much like a business, and when you put one more mandate on it, this mandate will affect 2 groups of people. It affects the university, and it also affects the students who are trying to graduate, and we have a crisis in higher ed right now. And that crisis has nothing to do with ethnic studies, and ethnic studies is not going to help that. Kids can't get the critical classes they need to graduate in their areas of expertise that they need. So when you put another requirement, what you're doing is you're essentially forcing them to take an additional class. In many cases, it's so difficult to get the classes with the overcrowding. We're all very familiar with the billions in budget cuts. You're now going to push them further and further away from graduating. And I think for that reason alone, at this point in this crisis, while there may be some merit to what you're saying, I would love to learn more about the curriculum and perhaps overcome my apprehensions of many of of what I have seen with my own eyes and heard. But that's an argument for another day. We've got to deal with a crisis of getting kids graduated so they can get into the workforce, so that they can be paying off that investment, and that's critical. And we also have to protect the university system from having to implement something that's so costly and unwieldy, and at the same time, they fundamentally want to run their own shop and determine and have academic freedom. And my hat's off to them, because that's why California is such a great state and why we have such a great university system. So I would say I'm against it on those merits, if you'd like to speak to those.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. I have Mr. Asajian, Mr. Lara, and Ms. Brownlee on the speaker's list. Mr. Asajian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions are for clarification purposes, if I may. When we speak of ethnicity, we're speaking of different colors, different races, different religion. Am I correct by assuming so?
That is correct.
Okay. And I came here with open mind until I heard the members speak, and that kind of took me distance myself from your proposition here. So it won't any longer be electives. You have to take those courses, 2 courses. And to take those 2 courses, are there going to be additional requirements, or there should be 2 other courses that taken out, so that if I wear my college student hat, I want to get out there as soon as possible, and I didn't want to yet be another requirement, thinking that I'm a business major, even though coming with different ethnical background, I was more familiar with other ethnicities out of nature than what the school could have taught me possible. As much as I really like the idea of having all those courses available to those who have interest and show self-interest to take it, even as a business major, to learn more about different religion or different ethnic background. And then I listen what the university and faculty are telling us today under the circumstances, because last year we have done nothing but really go after their monies and put them in a place where it's much more difficult to operate the way maybe things were as usual. But now, on one hand, we're taking funds away. On the other hand, we're requesting that they do more and be forced to offer courses that otherwise maybe they didn't seem to be important for them or for the type of university they were. So would you please comment?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Yeah, it is a requirement, and actually at Sacramento State there already is a requirement for 3 units, so it would be additional to that. As I highlighted in my statements, there are a number of...
3 unit is 1 course, correct?
Yes,
okay.
sorry.
Thank you.
On our campus we have general education requirements for various areas, and many of them are much higher than the 6 units. So in many ways it is an issue of adding more, but it's also a value statement of what the university or the legislature sees as the important values for a higher education. That's number one. Secondly, in terms of the courses that students take, be aware that students do have 120 units to receive their BA in CSU, and there's between the major, general education, and then electives overall. I see a lot of students who I advise, and honestly, I have to say there's a disagreement that I have. Most of the issues that students have with not getting classes is actually in majors, not necessarily in the general education. So a lot of times they're sitting around with nothing to do because they can't get a required course in their major, and they're sitting around with less units than they could possibly have.
Was there, if I may, Mr. Chair, any possibilities that this can be required electives that now you take easier to remove some electives than courses from the major units required to take? Were there any communications with our CSUs as how else we can make this work without maybe with them coming on board with you?
Okay. The addition of a requirement and the assumption that it adds a course is a linear notion that is not correct necessarily. At San Francisco State, ethnic studies has so many courses that we're embedded in a lot of the other requirements that exist. So we actually may be serving 3 requirements at the same time. I can envision at our campus, I'm not talking about other campuses, with you wouldn't have to add 2 extra courses. You would just double count it. For example, the American Institutions requirement can be taken in ethnic studies. That's an ethnic studies course, and it's an American requirements course. It does not necessarily add. In fact, what it does for the other part of the campus, because we work well with history, which is normally who teaches it, it allows history and our departments to share the burden. So students are more likely to get their American Institutions course done, and our faculty talk to one another so that the core of the course overlaps, but the approach to the course may differ in the margin. So the notion that it has to take, and with all respect, I've also been a statewide senator. I understand the complexity of looking at the whole system. But it is not a necessary condition that a requirement as an idea must mean another course. That notion of you get an idea, you've got to make a course, you've got an idea, you've got to make a course, is not a good curricular way to make an efficient curriculum.
Yeah. Was this communicated with the universities?
The university, unfortunately, because of the speed or what have you, Assemblyman Davis, his office did consult with ethnic studies faculty. To date, we've not been consulted yet internal to the CSU, and we look forward to that, and we expect to, and I expect to see the chancellor even for other reasons of diversity just tomorrow. But so I expect it will happen, but unfortunately that conversation has not occurred. We've not been consulted.
I just want to highlight the creativity that Dean Montero talked about. We have one course in ethnic studies which fulfills 3 requirements, actually: race and ethnicity, a writing intensive, as well as one of the social science courses. So he is actually correct. That it doesn't have to be linear and replacing another. It can actually be overlapped. There's many creative ways, and I think we're doing that now.
Mr. Lara, followed by Ms. Brownlee.
I apologize for my voice or lack of. I'm trying to mull this over. I mean, there's no bigger proponent to ethnic studies, I think, than myself, who actually minored in Chicano studies. And Mr. Donnelly, you weren't mentioned in my class, but I'm having trouble because of the additional burden on the graduation. We do want to get our students to graduate as quickly as possible, and I understand the reasoning behind the spirit of the legislation. I want to know from the UC, because I know they specifically pinpointed several issues that happened. What was done to address those issues on each of the CSU campuses, UC campuses, and additionally, I want to know how does this bill impact Senator Padilla's bill that was passed last year, 1330.
Mr. Chair, if I could, as the UC's coming up, if I could answer the first part.
Okay, I'd also just like to ask CSU to come up if you're talking about 1440, because that would be more a CSU issue than UC issue.
This bill does not mandate on the UC because we don't have the ability to do that. All it does is request that they do it. Right. So we have no actual authority to mandate the UC to do anything.
Which is the other issue that I have, is that we're trying to address something that happened on a UC campus, and therefore we're going to impose a law that's going to be effective on the CSU only.
Sure.
And I just would ask to be brief, a minute or two, each of you.
No, definitely. The specific initiatives that I had described some of them were in direct response to some of those incidents that happened. For example, in response to the incidents in the spring of 2010, the President's Advisory Council on Campus Climate, Culture, and Inclusion was created to specifically look at the issues of being able to, or I should say, the committee is charged with monitoring campuses' progress and metrics, examining these very type of issues. In result to that, or as a follow-up, each of the chancellors in the 10 campuses have also created the same type of advisory councils in order to really provide a venue where these type of issues can come up. And really looking and taking a more holistic approach. And really what our position is that issues like these are very campus specific. And so when it comes to curriculum and degree requirements, those are established by the faculty. So we believe that they are, and truly, the experts and best to be an ability to decide what such requirements with relation to the courses. But in terms of just the overall campus climate, our campuses have taken those directions in terms of providing, such as online policies and a forum where students in the overall community can report any of these type of incidents.
And so do you guys work directly with the student organizations and the fraternities on these issues directly? Or, because I know there were student organizations that did these fundraisers.
Right. I think through these advisory councils is how various members representing each aspect of the community or of the campus community are heavily involved in order to be able to address specifically those practices. So I know that in the instance at UC Irvine, I believe that's where there was specific campus organizations who may have been involved. But again, that's sort of in trying to address that, the best way that the chancellor saw fit to be able to address concerns like that is to really bring in the community and have those discussions to see what can be done and what policies need to be in place. And this is an ongoing process, and that's why I really want to be clear that the opposition to this bill is not in any way representative of us not taking serious attention in matters of these incidents that occur in our campuses.
Thank you.
And the 1440 issue?
Well, the key issue for 1440 is going to be two key issues. One is whether it's something that has to be addressed at the CSU or whether it would be something that can be part of what they transfer from the community colleges. And the other key issue is whether this is going to allow an additional 6 units or require an additional 6 units on top of the existing 120 units to graduation in those cases where majors or discipline requirements do not allow double counting or do not have room for electives. And those are key to us, particularly because of the graduation initiative.
Is it your opinion this would negatively impact progress on 1440?
Well, it's going to mean it's going to mean that the CSU and the community colleges are going to have to revisit a lot of the agreements that are already in place. Okay. And there'll probably have to be retraining of counselors and advising and so forth at a minimum.
Mr. Lara, it's still your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. Any further questions?
Okay, Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question for the chair is that I know the fiscal implications here are to be discussed in another committee, but the bill is not going to appropriations after this?
Yes, it would go to appropriations.
It would go to appropriations. Okay. Because I do think that is an element here that we can't kind of get our arms around. I hear, on the one hand, there can be a lot of sort of double counting and the requirement of not having to add additional courses. And then I can't imagine that some campuses wouldn't have to add some additional courses for their students to meet this requirement. So it's just something that we can't get our arms around here, but I wasn't sure whether it was going on to appropriations. So they will look at that particular issue. I think, I certainly, applaud the author in terms of what he's trying to accomplish here. And I hear the comments about, the legislature making a value statement by supporting ethnic studies. And I support ethnic studies and support, having more courses in our university system for students to explore and take. I'm struggling with this being a decision that the legislature would make, and in terms of a value system, at least in the CSU system, I look at the whole system, not its individual parts, and believe that there's at least at this juncture, given the fiscal restraints that the university systems are under, that there is a good choice of ethnic courses in the whole. Perhaps if you're a student that entered another campus and thought you had a career wish and you started to explore some courses, maybe there wouldn't be enough there for you at a particular campus. But hopefully students would choose where they go to college based on what that particular university system is emphasizing and has a larger breadth of course offering. So I think I'm just struggling right now with the issue of particularly at this juncture in time, whether this it's the right time to look at for the legislature to look at a mandate of this sort, and to perhaps look at other ways. And I agree with Mr. Lara about, the issues that the legislature has already expressed concern about some of the campus issues that have happened. And I think the chair is certain to make sure that we follow up on our your first hearing, and that we follow up on that, and we're going to be looking at that very, very closely. And so hopefully those efforts will address some of the campus issues in making that change. And I'm just concerned that this might not be the right time for us to be looking at this for the legislature to sort of mandate this, and that the Board of Trustees and the campuses and faculty perhaps is still the right place for those decisions to be made.
Thank you. Mr. Lara?
Mr. Mordino, I know you're not the author, but just out of curiosity, have any of the student organizations been informed? I mean, they're going to be bearing the brunt of this.
Mr. Davis' staff.
Okay.
You have to speak on the mic, please. And identify yourself too, please.
My name is Emerson Luke, a legislative aide for Mr. Davis. I'm not aware of any student organizations on the CSU campus being in conversations with our office.
Well, I mean, I think that's an important proponent if we move forward with this bill. I mean, these student organizations, the students are going to be the ones having to take an additional course, paying more fees. So I think if this bill moves forward or continue the conversations, I would really encourage you to meet with the student organizations.
Yeah, Mr. Fong.
First of all, I wanted to thank Assemblymember Portantino for bringing this in, because you're an enlightened European American bringing an ethnic studies issue up. Secondly, I studied ethnic studies in college. I have my minor in ethnic studies, and I really appreciate everything it's taught me. It taught me how to get along with everybody, and it's a real valuable value statement that we can make. We're a policy board. We're not into the appropriations, and so appropriations might have another issue with this because there might be some cost. But this is good policy, and I'm going to support it today.
Thank you, Mr. Fong. Any other comments or questions?
Very quickly, Mr. Chair, I can, and I agree with what's being said, and I really would like to support this. I just feel like there is room for the author and the CSUs to come and bring something together to give me that comfort zone. And this time I don't have it.
Okay, well, if I may comment, I don't think it's good policy, and I usually agree with Mr. Fong on most higher ed issues. I think it's horrible policy to have the legislature be making curricular decisions. I think, mandating ethnic studies may be a very good idea if it comes from the campuses, comes from the Senate. It comes with student input. I am surprised, as Mr. Flowers said, there are no student groups here speaking in support if they've been polled, because it's important to know if the students actually support this or not. Mr. Lara, I think was it your bill that was a resolution in support of ethnic studies, and I voted for that. I think many of us on this panel did. We're very supportive of ethnic studies programs. I'm not supportive of the legislature making curricular decisions, particularly with this budget, with the zero-sum game that we have, where there may be some campuses where some students don't have to take additional courses because the course meets multiple requirements, but without any doubt, some campuses will have to look at additional courses, which means faculty being laid off to replace with other faculty perhaps, which means deciding that a geometry class or a history class or some other class is not as important. And that may be a very good decision, but I don't think that should come back to the Higher Ed Committee in Sacramento to make those decisions. I think those decisions are best made by the faculty. So for those reasons, though I highly value ethnic studies, I'm not going to be able to support this bill. With that, I'll ask the author to close, or author's representative to close.
I know Mr. Davis, it's a passion of his, and I know he appreciated the faculty members who came and shared their perspective. I do think it's a value statement, and on behalf of Mr. Davis, I would ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Portantino. With that, I'll ask the Secretary to call the roll.
Block.
Leoff.
There hasn't been a motion.
Oh, you're right. Mr. Portantino was the previous chair and much better at this. Yes, we don't have a motion right now. Mr. Fong is making a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion. Is there a second? Seeing no second, the bill dies without a motion. Thank you, Mr. Portantino. Okay, I'll present my bill. Oh, you're not for your okay? Yes. Okay, Mr. Donnelly, my bill is up, so.
Mr. Block, would you like to open up on your bill AB 822?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. AB 822 is a higher education bond. It would authorize the three segments of higher education, the University of California, California State University, and California community colleges, to go to the voters to try to raise funding that would go toward additional facilities and various other resources. We all know that our higher education system is in peril. We know that we've made cuts for several years now. 2 years in a row we've had major cuts. We know that the infrastructure in the community colleges, the CSU and the UC, are all in some areas crumbling. In these times of constrained budgets, it's critical that we have the facilities, the equipment to do a better job of preparing our students for jobs of the 21st century. Right now, the future depends on us to allow the voters to vote on a bond measure that would allow our university systems to expand, to grow, to better serve students and to better serve the state, because as we produce more well-trained graduates, we are producing more taxpayers and more innovators, more innovative thinkers who can create additional industry for California. AB 822 will ensure the California system of higher education has classroom buildings we need. It's legislation that would allow us to move forward at a time when, unfortunately, we've seen education largely moving backward in terms of funding. Again, this bill would merely allow the voters to vote on a higher education bond. It's supported by California's public segments of higher education, University of California, the California State University, California community colleges, and many other higher ed groups and organizations are supporting this bill, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Do you have witnesses in support?
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Michael McGee with the State Chancellor's Office for California Community Colleges. We are in support of a statewide bond because of the dire need of our facilities to modernize as well as new construction. Our most recent capital outlay five-year plan identified approximately 15.4 million square feet for new facilities and about 27.6 million in modernization, which is, by my count, about 60% of our current assignable square feet. Over a 10-year period, our most recent update to our five-year capital outlay plan shows about $37.2 billion in need, and that's in part because of our need to plan for the future, to look each year as required by statute at a five-year plan. More recently, the figures have increased due to escalation costs as identified by finance and also increases in construction costs. So, and that's why we're up here in support of the statewide bond. Thank you.
Good afternoon, folks. Wes Larson, California State University. We're the sponsors of 822, and we've been working with the chair on this. We would like, we understand the dynamics of what's happening with our budget, and we just want to, we know Ms. Brownlee has her bill and will be coming in committee tomorrow. We just want to have the conversation and move this along. Our need is tremendous. The last bond was Prop 1D 6 years ago. It's been long spent. CSU's only facility money is through a GO bond. We're not like the community colleges or the University of California that have other tools. This is our only tool in the game, and so we support the chair's efforts to have the conversation as it goes through the process this year. We ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Are there any witnesses in opposition?
Other support?
Other support.
Oh, more support.
There just wasn't enough room.
Bring on the cavalry.
Excuse me. Mr. Chair, Bonnie Slauson on behalf of the California Community College League, and we are in strong support of this measure and moving it along and support many of the comments made by the earlier advocates for this bill. There is, in your analysis, it identifies a significant need for the community colleges for GO bonds. We have many projects that are already queued up without any funding, and Mr. McGee identified those dollar amounts for you. It's almost close to $30 billion over many, many years, and we appreciate your support of it.
Karen French for the University of California, and we too are in support of the bill. In concept at this point, as more details are put into the bill, that we will continue to be in support of it and look forward to working with the author, and thank him for introducing it.
Mark McDonald, McCallum Group, on behalf of number of local community college districts that have projects in the pipeline at the Chancellor's office: Antelope Valley, Los Angeles, Kern, Glendale, Mount San Jacinto, Los Rios, and Yosemite community college districts. And we would associate our comments with those of the Chancellor's office and the League and urge your support. Thank you.
Andrea York, on behalf of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. We have a long-standing position of support for bonds, and we do have great need. I'd also encourage all of us to continue to seek additional revenue sources for the general fund so that we have students to place in those buildings. Thank you.
Is that all the witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Seeing none, Mr. Chairman, would you like to close?
Questions?
Oh, I'm sorry.
May I?
Absolutely. I didn't mean to run it.
I just, obviously I have a bill of very similar intent. You have talked in your introduction of this bill today, you've talked about the need for, which I agree with, the need that all three segments have relative to facility needs and equipment, et cetera. You call this the kindergarten through university public education facilities bond. Just, wondering why you would call it exactly what my bill is called, and what is your intent, what's your direction?
Ms. Brownlee, this is a CSU-sponsored bill. We've certainly been working with our colleagues in higher ed. It was never it's always been intended to be a K university bond, but we need to have a conversation within higher ed on a number of dynamics, not to mention how we split the bond and some other issues. We needed to have that conversation within higher ed and come to an agreement before we sat down with K-12. But it's our envision that higher ed has to be connected with K-12 to make this work.
Yeah, Ms. Brownlee, the way I see it, we hopefully will have two vehicles moving forward, both your bill out of education and this bill will have both K-12 and higher ed working toward it. And frankly, it doesn't matter to me which bill ultimately leadership chooses to go forward with. I hope that one of a bond measure makes it onto the ballot. I don't really care how. We've been asked by CSU in the 4 years to in the 2 years as well to have a bill come out of higher ed that has a higher ed policy discussion. I don't see our two bills as mutually exclusive at all. I think they will be ultimately work together.
Okay. Well, I obviously support the need. I'm a little still not very exactly clear on I understand that you feel the need to have this bill to have the conversation relative to higher education, and that this could be the vehicle for K through 12 as well. That's what I'm hearing you say, right? Yeah, okay. And I guess just to speak to the sponsor of the bill is that I'm sort of saddened, if you will, that you don't feel like you can have the conversation with me as the author of the other bill. But, with that, I just wanted to state that because we haven't had a conversation about it. But I'm obviously not going to stand in the way for personal reasons of moving this bill forward. So I will certainly be supportive today.
Ms. Brownlee, we never intended to slide you at all. We met with the chair and early on, before we even knew that you were introducing 331. And so, is it 331 or 313? It's your bond.
I don't remember bill numbers.
But we never saw your issue. It was always we were working with the chair at the time when we introduced the bill, and we just didn't see yours. But we will have a conversation, I guarantee you,
okay,
with you on this.
Sounds good.
We just have some homework to do ourselves.
Hold you to it.
We will.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Ashajian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I do appreciate your efforts. I think something needs to be done. My concern is, and I'm glad to see here the Community College League, because I personally have worked on 4 local measures to go on a ballot, and we were successful 3 out of 4 times. And I want to give names so you know what colleges I'm talking about. We failed with the Cuesta College when we tried to do this. We were very successful with Hancock College. We were more successful with Lucia Mar School District twice to have a measure pass. Those areas that we have done our homework, now we're doing this statewide. Like, are we getting penalized for our efforts? Should we have waited for something like this to come? And who would benefit from it? Even though if it's the benefit of our students, so be it, because they're our future, and I can see that point. The other thing has happened since then with the schools that I'm personally involved. We have formed foundations to upgrade equipment, regardless of what equipment it is, from computers to sport facilities. And if I was you, want to think about November, because what I hear so far that there's going to be so many measures on the ballot come November. Is this going to be lost in the many that's going to be in there? And then could this be better handled on local levels?
Oh, well, as far as November, I think we've moved away from that as a date on this. We're now, it's an open date in terms of when, if a bond makes it through, when it might be on the ballot. In terms of local districts that have already done a very good job of floating their own bond measures, raising money through foundations, I think you'll find up and down the state. In San Diego, the San Diego district raised $1.5 billion in bond money. That's not enough, frankly. Unfortunately, I would guess that your districts that did a wonderful job in raising money locally would also say they could use help from a state bond, and that San Luis Obispo, the CSU there, could use help from a state bond, which they don't have the ability to do locally. So I think this helps each of us locally, as well as the individual local efforts. I think they work together to create a program where students can learn what they need to learn.
Obviously, the trust level on local is totally different than statewide, because you can touch, you can see, you can feel, and good feel. And as I said, some of the measures passed by better than 75%. Because and second time around when we came to do the same thing, it was even better because we delivered the product, so to say. On a state level, I don't know if that same feeling exists. And
well, Wes, am I correct in saying that, Mr. Larson, that the CSU can't do local bond measures?
Absolutely. A GO bond is the only game in town for the CSU. Now, certainly the University of California, they can float their own bonds. Community colleges have the ability to go to their local property owners and through bonding authority do that. But CSU's only game in town is a state GO bond.
And Mr. Sajian, for any of us who have CSU campuses locally, I think politically you're absolutely right. When we're trying, if you get involved in trying to pass a statewide bond, you do it in your area by highlighting how it's going to help San Luis Obispo or San Diego State or whatever your local campus might be.
Okay, so but just observation and not an argument. The reason probably universities don't do locally because students come from all over the place. So it's not as touching as local high school and local community college. But just an observation, not to create an argument. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the panel? Over here, Mr. Fong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When was the last time that a statewide bond measure was proposed?
6 years ago, 1D.
And how did that go?
It passed.
It passed. And are they still using money from that bond?
It was a 2-year bond, and it was spent 4 years ago.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll move the bill.
Do we have a second? Mr. Fong seconds. Mr. Chairman, would you like to close on your bill?
No, just want to assure Ms. Brownlee that if this bill does go through, we will sit down together, you and I and the interested parties, and we'll work it out. Truly, truly.
Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Block.
Aye.
Block I. Donnelly.
No.
Donnelly, no. Asajian.
Not voting.
Brownlee. Brownlee, aye. Fong.
Aye.
Fong, aye. Galgiani. Galgiani, aye. Lara. Lara, aye. Miller. Miller, no. Portantino. It's 5-2.
We have one more bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your bill is out.
Okay, our last bill is for vote only, so we'll move right to the vote. It's item number 4 in your packet. It's AB 383 by Portantino. We heard this bill last year. I'll ask the Secretary to call the roll. Oh. Yeah, is there a motion on the Portantino bill 383? Mr. Fong moves.
Could I say something before I move it? At the college district that I taught at, San Jose Evergreen Community College District, the faculty association and administration agreed through collective bargaining that the 50% full-time workload would be the maximum that full-time instructors would be able to get. And so I'm supportive of this bill because it's consistent with what I'm doing locally.
So that is a motion then?
It's a motion. Motion.
Okay. Is there a second? The chair will second just for the sake of moving to a vote. Let me just say, to refresh your memory, this is a bill, and we can't discuss this because it's already been discussed. It would pay a stipend to colleges, and I think it's a CFT-sponsored bill, if I'm not mistaken, to community colleges that have no more than 50% of an overload taught by faculty. And I know it's been a long time since we discussed it, and I apologize, but these are kind of the rules of the game, and the author's not here. It doesn't say how much of a stipend. There's a lot left out of the bill that the author says that down the road he will fill in those details. If it does pass, it will move to appropriations where, frankly, it's unlikely there will be funding for it anyway. So with that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, no comments allowed.
Make a comment.
It's your choice.
I made a comment, so go ahead.
Yeah, you make a comment. You can make a comment about the bill, but not a for or against. Just
Okay, it's about the bill because what Mr. Fong said, if it's existing, why do we need this? The other, obviously, we had another bill that doesn't allow schools, in order to balance their budget, to lay off teachers. And obviously, to overload a teacher more than 50% doesn't make sense. But shouldn't this power be given to the local schools for their bargaining capabilities? So,
reasonable question to raise.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we have a motion and a second. The chair will be supporting this to move on to the next stage and let the author fill it out a bit. But. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Block.
Aye.
Block I. Donnelly. Donnelly, no. Asajian. Asajian, no. Brownlee. Fong.
Aye.
Fong, aye. Galgiani. Lara. Lara, aye. Miller. Miller, no. Portantino. 3 yes, 3 no.
Yeah, we're going to hold the roll open, but he will make it. Yeah, so it fails anyway. But we'll hold the roll open for him to add his vote on this and the last bill, but it fails. Okay. Okay, with that, we've concluded the business of the agenda. Thank you for attending. Meeting adjourned. Oh, yeah, not adjourned, just holding the roll open for Mr. Portantino.